Hello and welcome to another Thoughts Per episode, The Last of Us edition, where we will be practicing the age-old meme. Step 1, lay down. Step 2, try not to cry. Step 3, cry a lot. Apologies, by the way, if I sound slightly different this episode. I'm quite ill. Now, unfortunately, I don't think this episode hit me quite as much as it might have if I was taken off guard by it, if I was surprised by it, as most people who talk about this episode were. But sadly, as I was behind, as I wasn't even really too interested in watching this show before this episode even aired, I came to it late and had my expectations set. So I knew it was going to be a tearjerker, I knew it was going to be incredibly sad, and I knew it was about a gay couple. All things considered, it was still an incredibly touching and effective story set in that world. But I think if I'd been taken off guard by it, my physical response would probably have been elevated from misty-eyed to slightly more than misty-eyed. I've got to say, though, the fact that this episode is even controversial, because yes, I've seen it trending on Twitter for all the wrong reasons, the fact that it's controversial is kind of embarrassing for us as a human race. I think the time skips were so well done. Like, at first we're introduced to Bill, and we see that he's kind of like this doomsday prepper, and we're not really expecting anything more out of him than that. Certainly not like this hugely romantic underside, right? And then obviously as he meets, Frank, as he meets Frank, you know, you see the trepidation in him, as he's probably like, why do I find this man so handsome? And it was very awkward at first, and that's why I love the kind of like skip ahead 3 years later when they're obviously much further along in their relationship. Before I get too far into that though, I just want to mention the start again. Like, it's so cool, this lore of like this doomsday prepper who ended up taking over an entire village and making his own little quarantine area, and is just having the time of his life, just hanging out by himself. He don't need nobody, until, as he mentions in one of those final scenes, he meets Frank, and suddenly he has something to lose, and suddenly he's scared of losing it, you know? But yeah, just the progression of the different time skips throughout the years was really, really well handled. How they go from like this awkward first meeting to like 3 years later, when they're clearly obviously used to each other and being in this relationship, and they're arguing because, I mean, I think it's so well done that they're not perfect for each other. Like, of course, Frank is fed up with some of Bill's obsessive prepper bullshit after being holed up with him for 3 entire years. And as time goes on, you can see how they kind of, like, work that out between them, and find middle ground and stuff. And, like, you see things become less of an issue, like how Frank trades one of Bill's guns for these strawberry seeds, and at first Bill's like, which gun? But then he tastes the strawberries, he's like, okay, yeah, this is good. Sadly, I was also spoiled about the use of On the Nature of Daylight, the very sad orchestral song they played towards the end of the episode when the double suicide thing was going down. So I was kind of expecting that as well, but that is like one of the saddest orchestral things you can break out in anything. Side note, watch Arrival. Don't look up anything about it. Watch Arrival. I did think there was a weird pacing blip when you had that moment in time where the raiders were attacking them and Bill gets shot, and the way that like he's kind of like losing consciousness, you're supposed to believe that he's dying, right? And it's just going to be Frank left, and he's telling Frank he's got all these preparations made for him, you know, he's supposed to call Joel and Joel will come and take care of him or whatever, and then it immediately hard cuts to 10 years later, and we see that Frank now has cancer and Bill's looking after him, and the way it cuts and changes so quickly, like the circumstances almost, you know, flip on their head. I almost believed it was a dream sequence for a minute until I saw like all the pieces of art. I was like, okay, that's a little bit too intricate to be a dream sequence, but I thought maybe Bill's like an imagined ghost, but no, it wasn't. It was just, I don't know if that was really an intended effect, so I'm putting that down to perhaps a little blip in the pacing. Maybe there's a deleted scene somewhere. Like, they could have at least mentioned that he still suffers from his old gunshot wound or something, but no. No, he's just fine now. I mean, it's been 10 years. He's had time to recover, but still. Also, it was sad how, didn't Bill say to Frank, I'm sorry that I'm aging faster than you? But then obviously it's Frank who goes down with cancer and becomes the one who looks more aged and needs taking care of. So it's an interesting set of circumstances. I guess it's trying to be subversive. I don't know if it's succeeding in the right way. But yeah, just in general, this episode is a really beautiful snippet of, like, you know, telling us that life doesn't have to just be you've got survivors in quarantine zones and you've got infected patrolling around the outside of a quarantine zones. That's not all there is to life. You can still have little pockets of, you know, beauty like this. And another thing that I really appreciated as well, which I think gives it a get out of jail free card for the next thing I'm going to bring up. But I appreciate that this is a depiction of two gay men who aren't, like, super young or, you know, very attractive. It's not what you typically see in gay romance. I mean, I'm not an expert in gay romance, but from what I've seen, it's not what you typically see or expect, but it's still the kind of romance that exists in the world. Just because the men are older and have beards, and one of them you would expect to be more of like a right-wing prepper type, like, they can still have feelings for men, it turns out, and it's nice to see that portrayed on screen. Now, I mentioned the get out of jail free card. Have you seen people on Twitter talking about how the gays are tired of tragedy? Like, we only get represented when there's something tragic going on. Well, that's certainly the case again here, isn't it? It ends up in a double suicide. So The Last of Us didn't necessarily avoid that particular trope, but to be fair, it is a pretty fucking bleak world, and tragedy is pretty much as common as Weetabix here in Britain in 2023, the non-apocalyptic times. In fact, the world of The Last of Us is so bleak that I morbidly actually felt quite relieved when it was revealed that Bill had also poisoned himself with, or overdosed or whatever, to go out along with Frank, because I think the thing that was the most heart-wrenching about it was that Bill would have to live in this world without Frank, and what would his life look like being alone again after so many years, knowing that his life was so much better when Frank was still alive. And by the way, I don't condone just offing yourself because you'll be sad after something tragic happens in real life, but in the context of The Last of Us world, I don't know, there was something horribly, mortifyingly quite beautiful about it, and also almost a merciful relief. Oh man, I don't know, I hope no one takes this out of context. I'm not saying it's okay to do that kind of thing, but in terms of the narrative, it was very, as Frank said, remarkably romantic. Is that what he said? He said something like that. Anyway, I'm going to stop digging myself this hole now. Just a few things to mention about the episode otherwise. I enjoyed seeing Joel discover that they were dead. Thankfully, he didn't enter the bedroom. Like, something stopped him. Like, that door slamming behind him. That was obviously because the window was open and the wind slammed it shut, but there's something almost like otherworldly about that, like something be like, hey, no, don't walk in there, go see what Ellie's reading. And also just the fact that they dedicate like 80% of this entire episode to this extremely tragic set of circumstances, and the way Joel just reacts to it. So they're dead, like deadpan, like that is the level of tragedy that is common in the world, to the point where even though they're his friends and Joel must very much like them, he's just kind of like, you know, so they're dead, okay, move on, kind of thing. It really speaks to what he expects from the world at this point. That being said, we didn't get too much of Joel and Ellie in this episode, but I feel like we saw Joel start to warm up to Ellie a little bit more this episode, and show more of himself, if you know what I mean. One last thing as well, that kind of tea party scene. I don't know if it's a tea party. I can't quite remember. Maybe it was more of a wine party. But when Joel and Tess were talking to Bill and Frank, they looked not just like obviously younger, but happier, and like they had less weighing them down. And I'm reminded of Tess's final words to Joel, where she mentions that he needs to undo some of the bad shit they've done over the years, and how he and Tess told Ellie that they're not decent people. But here, Joel is telling them that, oh, luckily for you, we're pretty decent people. So what happens in between those years? Because when we first see Joel at the start of his series after the outbreak, you're kind of supposed to believe that the reason he's so grizzled and the reason he's so kind of like stoic is because we've just seen his daughter die, right? But there was clearly a period of time in between then and now where he was some semblance of functioning, emotional, happy human. So I wonder, I might be reading too much into that, but I wonder if there's more to that. Once again, please do not comment telling me whether my speculation is right or wrong. This is all rhetorical. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm going to go cry into a pillow. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I thought a new episode would be up today, but I guess they go up late Sunday night in the UK, so I guess there'll be one tomorrow. I don't know if I'll necessarily watch it tomorrow. I might do. I'm not exactly hooked, per se. Like, I'm not dying to see what happens in the next episode, but I am enjoying these episodes very much, so it'll be fun times. So, yeah, thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.